to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent. Today's skies are blanketed in haze, clouding the outlook for Metro Detroiters. It's not fog. Wildfires burning hundreds of miles away in Canada are sending plumes of smoke all over the American Midwest. And that smoke is making it hard to breathe and sometimes affecting our health in untold ways. We know breathing wildfire smoke near the source is harmful, but there's still uncertainty about what happens as the smoke travels. Some emerging research suggests that smoke traveling long distances might chemically change and that it could potentially become even more harmful. Pulmonary specialist Dr. Erica Mosesen has been closely following the issue of wildfire smoke and lung health. She hosts a podcast called Air Health, Our Health, where she breaks down how things like wildfire smoke and the climate change that's intensifying those fires affect our health. Dr. Mosesen, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
So, Doctor, you've described wildfire smoke like secondhand cigarette smoke. Could you explain exactly what happens to our lungs and our bodies when we breathe in this particulate matter?
Yes, absolutely. I think sometimes we think of smoke as just one thing, but it's actually this chemical mixture, which includes a whole host of different toxins, frankly, that can affect our body. And the one we really focus on often with wildfires is a type of particulate matter called PM2.5, which just stands for particulate matter sized at 2.5 microns, which is just teensy, teensy tiny. And when we breathe it, we can't even see it. When we breathe it, it goes into our lungs and goes right across the little 1 cell thick membrane between our bloodstream, the air sacs in our lungs and our bloodstream. And it circulates around our body, and it can cause disease in basically every organ system. And it affects us from womb to tomb, at all stages of life. And that's kind of analogous to, particulate matter is one of the toxins that people, breathe with lighting other things on fire, right? Including cigarettes. And so that's why sometimes I'll use that analogy with patients, because sometimes it kind of helps people understand what we might be dealing with. So all the different things you can see with secondhand smoke, we've often found that you can see with other forms of particulate matter generated in air pollution.
From womb to tomb, Dr. Mosesen, that really paints a picture of just how serious of an issue it is to be breathing in wildfire smoke. And I realize you've highlighted the effects on vulnerable groups, children, pregnant people, seniors, as being particularly at risk. Why are these folks more susceptible to the effects of wildfire smoke?
Well, I think it kind of helps to think of, air that's got pollution in it, whether it's from, diesel exhaust, wildfires, secondhand smoke, as kind of having a certain dose of toxin suspended in it, right? So if you breathe more of that air, you are actually getting a higher dose of those toxins affecting your body. And we know, I got 3 young kids just run around and they breathe a lot more. So at baseline, like just a regular resting kid is actually breathing more than an adult, and they're actually taking in a higher dose of these toxins than an adult. And the other thing is we know that pregnant women breathe bigger doses of air and can also be more affected. And then the more vulnerable you are, kind of at baseline. So if you have underlying heart disease or lung disease, we focus a lot with, air pollution on lungs because that's the way it gets in. But honestly, some of the bigger risks are actually cardiovascular risks. So people like having heart attacks, strokes, things like that, kind of like we see with cigarettes, frankly. And then as people get older, not only do they tend to accumulate other illnesses along the way, whether they now have underlying heart disease or lung disease, but they're also just less resilient. So the extremes of age are really important. And then the other thing is to think about other people who breathe in extra outdoor air pollution. And those are our outdoor workers who are very vulnerable. Obviously, my heart goes out to our wildland firefighters because they are really on the front lines and trying to keep us all safe. But we also think of our construction workers, our farm workers, there's a lot of people that are working hard outdoors and exerting and breathing in more and more of these particulates, and that can potentially affect their health. So it's always just very important, I think, for people to be educated about what's in the air, and then try to start to think about, what they can do, who's vulnerable in their family, and how they can try to keep themselves and their community safe.
Doctor, I'm wondering about the long-term effects of exposure to wildfire smoke, which we have had air quality alerts here in Michigan for several consecutive days. Things have cleared up a little bit, and then the smoke returns. And so I think that's causing concern for folks. And there's this question of, is this the new normal? And I know from speaking with climate scientists, many would say, yes, this likely is the new normal, because we know climate change is intensifying the frequency and size of wildfires. So with that in mind, what is the potential cumulative effects?
So when we look at studies on the issue, what we really have to know about long-term effects of exposure to air pollution like PM 2.5 mostly comes from traffic-related air pollution, right? Air pollution from diesel exhaust, air pollution from, highly polluted air in our cities. And that's where we get our long-term data from. And so it's hard to know if the intermittent high burst exposures that we have with PM 2.5 are going to have the exact same effects, are going to have like slightly different effects, because what's burning and what's in the particulates probably really does matter. And as you talked about, as these things travel, also the smoke can oxidize, the particulates can start to change. But I always kind of like to be a bit practical about it, because we don't really I don't want to sit around and wait for 20 to 30 years to have the final answer on exactly how these things affect you. We know that PM 2.5 in general can lead to heart attacks, strokes. We've seen studies where there are these big spikes in particulate matter, and then in the days that follow, you have some pretty serious events, such as people having to go to the ER more for asthma, for respiratory illnesses. And, a study looking at some of this in California did show kind of increased rates of sudden cardiac death, which is obviously the most scary sort of thing. Again, low numbers, but real. So we don't have any reason to think that this particulate matter, PM 2.5, when it's generated from, fires, is going to be wildly safer than PM 2.5 the way we've always studied it. Mm-hmm. In fact, there's probably some disease processes where it's even worse, right? And so that's a thing where it's going to be a challenge. And then the other thing is, as someone who has to live my life in wildfire country out here in Oregon, and also someone who cares for people with chronic lung disease, I don't want people to become, constantly paranoid about the air they breathe and be trying to, focus on things that are really outside of their control. So I think trying to help people understand it, and then be able to kind of take steps, understanding it's a good idea to mitigate it, and then try to, in general, be breathing the cleanest air you can, right? So you may not have control about when the spikes of wildfire air come, but you can make plans to ensure that there are clean air refuges for you and your community. And then at baseline, on any given day when it isn't a time of wildfires, that people are breathing the cleanest air possible, right? That the city air is as clean as it can be, that indoor air is as clean as it can be, because we do think there's a resilience component to it, right? Like if you can, because the body can heal to some degree. So if, 99% of the time we're breathing really, really good clean air, people are going to be much more able to tolerate these spikes.
Let's drill down on that a little bit, because I do want to discuss with you what kinds of policies you think could be enacted by local governments and communities. But you mentioned the clean air refuge as a practical response. So I'm sure that's a term that sounds really new to a lot of our listeners. Could you share some affordable, effective ways people can improve indoor air quality, especially, let's say, if they can't afford expensive air purifiers, because that's what you mean by a clean air refuge, right?
Yeah, well, going indoors can, it's really hard because it depends how leaky your home is, right? So it can vary how effective it is to go indoors, and see if you can drop particulates. But say, okay, maybe you drop it by half, right? But if the PM 2.5 level outside is in some very hazardous range, like 500, and you drop it to half that in the 250 range, you're still in pretty bad air, right? So one of the things you mentioned with the challenge with air purifiers is it can be there's not a lot of regulation, right? So air purifiers can be very effective if they are filters. And the idea is you want to basically have a room, or probably the place in your house where you spend the most time, where there is something in that room that's actually getting particulates out of the air, right? Moving air across the filter and removing particulates. So the ones that most people are familiar with are HEPA filters. I know in times of high wildfires, a simpler thing can be achieved with a simple box fan where you attach a MERV 13 to it, which is another filter that you can kind of get at your local, Home Depot, I guess. And those are the general principle being that you move air across a filter that pulls particulates out. You got to be careful about things that are sold as air cleaners where they're claiming to put things into the air that they say will clean it, because we just don't know that much about some of those claims. And some of those devices have been shown to generate things like ozone, which can be very damaging to the lungs, or putting out hydrogen peroxide in the air, or ionizing the air and claiming that it will make the particles stick together and fall. And it's just, there's too many different versions of those technologies, and there's really just not enough data known on the safety. And obviously, if you're like locking down a room and then putting other chemicals in the air, it just may not be the safest thing. At least that's what all the building engineering scientists tell me, and what they would recommend avoiding.
Okay.
So cost-effective things for local governments to do would be, for people who can't afford HEPA filters, although they are getting more and more affordable, are things like, seeing if there's a way to, in big surge times, provide things like box fans or MERV 13s. A lot, like I know our Oregon Health Authority will teach people how to assemble those. And then areas where if it's, because you also worry about brownouts and, blackouts and stuff. So places like malls, libraries, areas where communal spaces where people can try to make sure that there's, clean air indoors. We've had smoke shelters out here during wildfire events that I've volunteered at to just try to make sure to bring people indoors, especially our unhoused community.
Doctor, I'm wondering also, though, okay, so everyone should try and make an effort however they can to create the cleanest air possible within their homes. I'm thinking again, though, when we step out of our homes, because air quality alerts, they often single out the vulnerable groups that we talked about. But I have to tell you, I am feeling it in my lungs today, in my throat, just from the short 5-minute walk that I took to work today. And I'm wondering, should the general public, should we be more cautious during these alerts? You've mentioned striking that fine line. We still want to live our lives. But what else should we be doing to protect ourselves? How concerned should we be?
Well, I do think listening to your own body is helpful, because when we do these studies, right, they're a normal population. So statistically, there's people who are going to be more or less vulnerable and resilient in that group. So if people are really noticing, hey, when there's wildfires, I feel sick, I think you should listen to that. Things that people can do if they need to go outdoors and they are very sensitive to the particulate matter. An N95 mask can actually really dramatically reduce the particulates. That's why, a lot of people were wearing them. I remember during the COVID pandemic, everyone suddenly learned how to put on an N95. And I have to say, the nice thing about a lot of things that help reduce particulates is they're kind of good year round and for a lot of other things that can affect you, right? Having HEPA filters in your home running is, they often don't use a lot of energy. And they're also really good at picking up allergens, picking up pollen. With climate change also, not only are we having more wildfires that are more potent, we also have a longer pollen season. The pollen is more intense. It's more allergenic. Like I think we all remember from high school biology that CO2 is plant food, right? So, honestly, it's like, it's not just clean air from smoke in the summer, but it helps you with, during pollen season, if there's people suffering from allergies, it helps with, animal dander, all this sort of thing. So,
but least, forgive me for jumping in, that mask at least has to be an N95. It's not going to be effective if it's just one of those plain cloth or surgical masks.
Yeah, it would be much, much less effective. It all depends on the caliber of the mask. But yeah, it's the N95. It's the very fine filtering device or mechanism, and then there's also a charge across it that also helps remove things. And the nice thing about, as opposed to with COVID, you can get the ones that have the exhaust, right? Because it doesn't really, what you're exhaling, you're not worried about infecting somebody else. So those ones sometimes make it a little more bearable to wear, because you're just needing the filtering in. You don't really need the resistance to the filter out. So sometimes people find those a little more tolerable.
Dr. Mosesen, we only have a few minutes left, so I want to pivot to a policy matter, if we could. Recent EPA decisions under the Trump administration are relaxing some regulations on greenhouse gases. And I'm wondering, for you, as someone who eats and breathes lung health, forgive that pun there, that's terrible. What are your thoughts on these changes and their potential public health impacts? I mean, what did you think when you saw that news?
Well, I have to say I was really disheartened by that news because I take care of a lot of people who are suffering from the downstream effects of climate change. So not just, I work in an ICU and I've seen people die of, heat events. So we're seeing these massive heat events more. We're seeing these longer allergy seasons like we talked about. And obviously the wildfires are probably one of the more dramatic and catastrophic effects of climate change. And we actually do have all the technology we need to actually decrease greenhouse gas emissions and transition to a cleaner energy future. And a future with less air pollution and less climate change and fewer wildfires is an awesome future, and I think it's worth investing in as a community. So I'm a member of the American Thoracic Society Environmental Health Policy Committee, and we are opposed to those changes, and we'll be, commenting and advocating against them as best we can. And I would encourage everybody who's suffering from the effects of climate change to sign up to testify to the EPA. You can email them and say you want to testify. The hearings are later this month, and just say, hey, I'm being affected by wildfires. Like the greenhouse gas emissions are affecting me. Please do your job, EPA, and keep our environment better and help clean it up.
You're saying that relaxing regulations on greenhouse gases, as the EPA is doing under Trump, is a direct threat to public health.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the EPA's mandate, is to work to protect our environment, to protect public health. So it's an absolute direct threat to public health.
In the last minute we have, given the trend of worsening wildfire events due to climate change, what are your biggest concerns as both a clinician and a parent for the future health of communities?
Yeah, well, I have 3 young children, and I love where I live in the Pacific Northwest. It's beautiful, but I think our children's quality of life in the future is being stolen from them, right? The ability to be out in nature and not fear, frankly, dying in a wildfire. I've had to flee a wildfire in the middle of the night with my kids, breathing smoke. All these things are threatening the future of our children, and we have alternatives. So I really hope that we, as a society, decide to be adults and make a better world for our kids.
Dr. Erica Mosesen is a lung and ICU doctor. She hosts the podcast Air Health, Our Health. We'll link to the show on our website at wdet.org. Dr. Mosesen, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and everyone stay safe out there.
This is the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. Coming up, we'll learn how one institution is archiving the golden era of gospel music and Detroit's role in gospel's musical history. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. And this is the Metro. Stay with us.